Hi, everybody. Welcome to this session. Am I audible? If you could just give me a yes. Awesome. All right. So welcome to the last design session of IGDC. Today we have an amazing talk. It's by Celia Hodent. It is How to Engage Players, a UX Approach to Onboarding and Motivation. So a little bit about Celia. She's recognized as a leader in the application of UX and cognitive science in the game industry. She brings over 10 years of experience in development of UX strategies and processes. She was the director of UX at Epic Games, worked specifically on Fortnite, and she's worked on some brilliant projects at studios like Ubisoft and LucasArts. She's worked on multiple platforms, from PC to console, mobile, and VR. She's also the founder of the Game UX Summit, and she's an advisor for the GDC UX Summit. She currently works as an independent consultant, helping studios increase the likelihood of their games to be more engaging and successful. I'm going to call her up in a minute. In the meanwhile, you know how this works. You can ask questions to Celia in the Q&A tab on the right panel. We'll also be circulating a feedback form. Please fill it out. It's a quick survey with just one question, but it really helps us get fantastic speakers. While we're here, I am going to quickly take a moment to thank our sponsors. Our presenting sponsor, which is Unreal Engine. Our gold sponsors, which is MPL, AWS, Glance, and Jungly. Our legacy silver sponsors, Gameshin, Laksha, and Yes Gnome. Our bronze sponsors, Quali and Gameon. Sponsors for the hyper casual track, Sunday. And our IP Connect sponsors, Succeed Innovation Fund. Big thank you to our sponsors. And now I'm just going to call Celia to take it away. Hi, Celia. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So I'm not sure exactly what was said about me, but I have a PhD in psychology, and I've been working in the video games industry for about 13 years now. I worked at Ubisoft, at LucasArts, and at Epic Games. I'm also sharing my screen at the same time, which is something we should not do too many things at the same time because we don't have good attention. We're going to talk about this a little bit. And at Epic Games, I was a director of UX, and I worked at the studio level. So I worked on multiple games, and I worked on UE4 as well, and I worked on that little game called Fortnite. And I left Epic in October 2017, and ever since then, I've been doing consulting work in freelance. So I'm spreading the UX love, explaining what it is, helping studios, big and small, and medium and indie developers to adopt a UX strategy and also to push UX maturity forward in the game industry. So today, I'm not sure, how much everybody knows about UX here. So I'm always trying to have a little introduction to make sure that everybody's on the same page. But then we're going to talk more specifically about onboarding and motivation and engagement. All right. And you can follow me on Twitter. I post a lot of stuff on Twitter, and I have a website where there's a lot of resources as well. So you can go check that out. Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, what do I mean by saying UX? So if you think about a design, let's say a park like this one, and you think about how it was thought through, like the designer, how the architect, how they thought about the park. We typically think about the design like this one. Like this is the intention. We're gonna have like a straight line, a pavement, and we just like hope that people are going to use it the way it was intended. But of course, like people do whatever they want, and we have goals, we have certain expectations. We are busy people and in a hurry, and if we want to cross the street, it's actually much faster to go across the grass here, and this is what a lot of people are doing, as you can see here. And so this is the user experience. It's whatever the users of the system, the service, the object, the park, the video game are doing what they want to do what are their goals, their objectives, what they understand from the environment. This is the user experience. And when we design something without taking into account the user experience, sometimes it's because we have constraints. It's probably maybe more expensive to do a curved line than a straight line. But this is what happens. And if we think about user experience too late, what happens is we try to patch it later down the road, but this is never going to be as efficient. And most people, they're not going to read it. They're just going to keep going. So this is what UX is all about. It's just considering human factors. It's considering that it's humans that are going to use what you're designing, what you're developing. And so we have to think about that as we develop the object, the system, the service, the video game, so that we can offer the best experience possible, and also the one that is intended for players. A video game is it's an art form, it's entertainment, so we have certain intentions, we want to convey certain emotions, and so we want to make sure that these are the emotions that people are going to feel. So we try to remove all the frustrations that are not by design. Like in a game, we're going to have frustrations as we play, we're going to die, start again. These are frustrations that can be by design, but we do not want any frustrations that are not by design. For example, people not understanding why they died, or not understanding a certain system, or how to accomplish certain things, or how to craft in a game. So you have to remember that the problem with trying to offer the best experience possible to people is that an experience is not something we design. It's not embedded in the design itself. Per definition, an experience is what is happening in people's minds as they interact with something. So we cannot design an experience. We design for an experience. We design an environment, and we hope that people are going to have the experience that we want as they interact with that environment. But because an experience is what happens in people's minds, we need to a little bit understand how the mind works. So that's the reason why when we talk about UX, the underlining components of UX is cognitive science, trying to understand the mental processes that are in place when we discover anything. So a video game, learn anything, how to play a video game. And so this is what this is representing here. It's an extremely simplified diagram of what's going on with the brain as we process information. Of course, it's much more complex than that, but we just try to simplify it here. It always starts with perception of an input, of a stimulus from the environment. We have many senses. We have more than 5. Then here you can, for example, sense temperature. So they're more than the 5 common that we always talk about, but these senses are going to sense all the stimuli from outside of our body, but also inside of our body, and we make sense of this, and this is perception. Then we're going to process information that we got from our senses. And when we learn anything, we memorize that new information, because there's no learning without memory. And as we memorize, it's changing physically something in the brain. We have billions of neurons. They're all connected up to like about 10,000 other neurons. And all these connections are called synapses. And these synapses change constantly. We have what we call a plastic brain, we have brain plasticity. And it's allowing us to adapt to our ever-changing environment, such as adapt to a pandemic. From one day to the next, we had to drastically change how we live and work. It was hard. I'm not saying the contrary, but we were able to do that thanks to our plastic brain. And so the brain is constantly changing depending on what we see, what we interact with. Like this presentation is currently changing the connections in your brain, hopefully for the better. But that's what happens in the brain. Of course, between the perception of an input and a change in memory, there are lots of other stuff happening, and there's a lot of factors that are going to influence the quality of information processing. Attention is a big factor, and this is what I'm just going to give you an example here. But as you can see, we have emotion and motivation as well. These are very important elements to sustain attention. We pay more attention to something if we care about it. And so this is what more specifically when I talk a bit later. Just please keep in mind that this is extremely simplified. The brain doesn't have like independent buckets like this. It's not necessarily a serial process. It's not even a process. We use a lot of terms coming from computers, but the brain is not a computer. It's a living organ, and therefore it is very complex. But just to give you an idea, we have a lot of great performance that the human brain is capable of doing quite a bunch of things, but we also have great limitations. So, for example, perception is subjective. We do not perceive the reality as it is. It's a construct of the mind. So, for example, here at the center, you can see either B or either 13, depending on what is the context in which this stimulus is embedded. So perception changes with context. It changes with culture, depending on who you are, where you're coming from, what is your prior knowledge on something, your expectation. So we have to be very, very careful with that. And so it's not because you're designing something that you think that people are going to perceive in the way you intended because it seems obvious to you that it is going to be obvious for your players, even if your players look like you. So it's really, really important to always test. That's why we play test a bunch of things to verify that all the stimuli, so in video games, it's mostly visual and audio, sometimes haptic stimuli. Well, it's always haptic when you touch the keys, but sometimes have vibrations, for example, on top of it. So that's sort of things we want to verify. Another thing, memory is very fallible. We forget a bunch of stuff. This is showing the exponential nature of forgetting. It was made in the 19th century and it was replicated in modern days. So this was made with material that is not meaningful. So it's just like syllables that didn't have any meaning. And as you can see, the more time passes, the more we forget, and we forget a lot at the beginning. So it's about like 70% of the content that we learn from one day to the next that we're gonna lose. That's the worst case scenario. Hopefully, when you teach something to your players, it's familiar and it is meaningful. It's not just syllables that don't have any meaning. So it should not be as bad, but still, players are going to forget stuff from one day to the next, especially if they play your game for a little while and then there's another game coming out. So they're going to play that game for a few weeks and then come back to yours. There's many things that they would have forgotten. And our attentional resources are fairly scarce. It's really hard to find Waldo or Wally. I don't know which version you have in France. We have Charlie. He's called Charlie. It's pretty hard to find him. He's here, by the way, so that you're not too frustrated by this presentation. Because we're not like computer, we can't scan the environment like this. We're not good at doing that. Rather, attention works like a spotlight, and then we filter out the rest. So when we're paying attention to one or two elements maximum, we have to filter out the rest. And so we're not good at perceiving something that's surprising, or sometimes a big change, we don't see it, notice it. And you have a lot of experiments that are really fascinating around the notion of change blindness or inattentional blindness is that lack of awareness that we can have if we're focusing on one thing. It's really hard for us to focus on something else, and we can miss out on very big information, like big stuff happening if we're focused on something else. We also cannot multitask efficiently. We're not good at that. And so this was a really quick intro to show you that we have great limitations in our brain, and these are the limitations we have to take into account when we make anything so that we can offer the best experience possible. And we don't, we don't rely on the fact that we think it's obvious. We play test because perception is subjective. We don't rely too much on people's memory. We offer them, information on the HUD all the time so that they don't have to remember too much information. And we also try to mind the cognitive load so that there's not too much going on at the same time, especially as people learn new things, because as you learn new things, it's taking more of your attentional resources. Like think about the first time you did something, your first day of work, the first time that you had to go to a place, the first time that you learned how to drive or to play a music instrument. It takes a lot of our attentional resources. After a while, we're getting more used to it, so we are more able to do something else at the same time. Same thing for your players. If the first time they play your game, they have to pay attention to a lot of things going to be training for them. So we have to be careful with that. So perception is subjective, attentional resources are scarce, and memory is fallible. So you have to take that into account. And when we apply that to games, all throughout the development of your game, we have to be careful with this. So I did a lot of presentations about that, so you'll you'll easily find some videos if you're more interested into that part. But today we're gonna more talk about engagement. And this is the framework I'm using when I'm working on a game to offer the best user experience possible for a game. There are two main pillars that we're focusing on. The first one is usability. So it's the ability of the game to be used. It's really, can people understand what to do? Do they remember what button to press? That sort of things. But it's not enough for a video game. It's not enough also for a tool. We prefer tools than when they're engaging as well. But for video games, it's essential. If a game is usable but boring, you're not going to play it. So for games, we really need them to be engaging. Before I talk about engageability, just a quick side note on usability, because there are a few things that, well, everything is going to have an impact on engagement, but there are two elements that I want to flag here. So usability, we use heuristics. So a heuristic is a rule of thumb. The most well-known heuristics for UX design or web design is were put together by Jacob Nielsen. It's very solid. So he has like a 10 usability heuristics. This is just an adaptation for game development using terms that we use more often in the game industry. And so signs and feedback and form follows function are notion that are really, really important to make your game clearer, and it will have an impact more specifically on engagements. Well, at least in my presentation, that's the reason why I'm gonna just show you a few things. Signs and feedback is basically when you start playing a game, can you understand what you need to do? Are there signs in the game that drive you to do certain things? Like here, you see gems. Like maybe you can understand that you need to pick up these gems, and you see that the dude at the top is probably an enemy. But then you have other people, probably their friend, their teammates. There's a sign like you're about to shoot, and you see something happening on your screen. So you might have an idea that, oh, okay, this is what's going to happen when I'm going to shoot. And depending on, if I have my ultimate or my weapon is ready for the super shot, it's going to look different. So these are all signs and feedback. So feedback is when you are pressing a button, and what is the system telling you what's going to happen as you do that. They guide players and they help them understand what's going on. Like, for example, you change a weapon. The signs and feedback are still here, but they're a bit different. So then you have a notion, even though you don't know anything about the game, you can have a notion that, okay, so this one at the top right is probably a different type of gun, probably something like a shotgun. The one here at the bottom is probably more something like a bomb, because it's going to throw something into some area of damage. So this is just by experimenting with the game, playing with the game. You can try to understand what's going on without any tutorial, just by experimenting. We're going to talk a little bit about that. This is tied to what we call conditioning. It's just like learning through stimulus, and you do the appropriate answer, and it's working or not working. And this is how we learn. There's a lot of stuff we learn through conditioning. So I'm just showing you this so that you can, I'm going to refer to that a bit later. And other stuff that's really important to help people engage them in the game, so that they need to understand what's going on to be engaged, is what we call form follows function. It's very close to the concept of affordance that we have in design. It's the idea that we help players or users understand the functionality of something by carefully designing its shape, its form, so visual form and audio form. So for example, we humans have a good expectation of how tortoises behave. We have a strong, what we call mental model, a strong mental representation of tortoises. And tortoises, we know that they don't go fast. And so if we see a tortoise in the game, we can expect it, unless, it's a ninja turtle, of course. That's different. But oftentimes we expect it to go slow. Or if you have a bullet, we can expect it's going to go very fast in one direction. Here, it's a boulder. It's attached to the ground. So we can expect that it's not going to run after us. And if we don't get close to it, it's not going to be dangerous to us. Unlike the skeleton here, because it's about to throw a bone at us. And so we can expect that it's going to be dangerous to us from a distance. And, like sharp teeth or or spikes on the back, it's probably good an indication that you should not jump on that thing because you're going to get hurt. So this is just an example with character design, but we use it also with the UI, with the environment design. It's just like making sure that people can understand the functionality of something so that they don't have to struggle and understand how things work. Now, depending on where you want to put the challenge, of course, you might sometimes want to be, sneaky, or sometimes you want to scare people and make them believe that this is safe and then it's not. So, of course, depending on the type of game you're making, you're going to make different decisions. But here, the challenge is clearly on the platforming skills of the players. And for Super Mario, there's not a lot of challenge around how to understand the enemies, at least not the common enemies. So that's also to re-emphasize that UX is not just the UI, it's everything that players experience in a game, from the advertisement the first time they hear about your game, to the music of the game, the sound effects, the visual effect, the animation, all of that is part of the experience. Community management is also a part of the experience. So it's really, really important to understand that this is a journey and everybody on the team is participating into shaping that journey for players. Okay, so that was just a couple of examples to show you how we work on usability to make sure things are more intuitive to use, that it's not too difficult to understand. We minimize like the memory load, the workload, all of that, so that players can understand, at least learn about the game more easily. And like I said earlier, a usable game is not necessarily fun. So what does make a game fun? What is fun? So I stayed a bit away of that term because we all have a different version of what we believe is fun. And so when you have a term what is very highly subjective, and a lot of people feel different things about that, makes it hard to have a systemic approach using a term that people they all have a different definition of it. So that's the reason why I stayed away from that term. It's not a bad term, but I don't find it as easy to use that other terms. I've been moving around with how to call this, how to make what is fun, and so I ended up using the term engagement, because at the end of the day, this is what we care about. Are people engaged? Are they playing the game? And after they're done playing, are they going to come back? If they come back, it's probably because they're having fun, whatever fun means for them. So that's the reason why I prefer to use the term engagement. And here I even do a twist with this. I use the term engageability to have a nice balance with usability. That's my term. So unlike usability, engageability, it's not being researched for decades. It doesn't have that academic research background and practitioner research background that usability has. So please take this with a grain of salt. That's my way to wrap it all up. But of course, all the stuff I'm going to talk about here is coming from science. It's evidence-based. It's just the way I wrap it up was not validated as usability was. Just making sure it's all clear. So to me, engageability have three main components, and the most important one is motivation. There is no behavior without motivation. You would not be listening to me right now if you were not motivated. Maybe someone forced you to watch me. Sorry for you, but it's still a motivation to watch this presentation. If there was no motivation whatsoever to watch this presentation, you would do something else right now. So that's the reason why it's really important to understand human motivation, to try to understand why would people play your game and why would people come back to play your game. So we're going to talk about that. But keep in mind that there's a lot of theories about human motivation. There is no one theory that can explain all of our behaviors. It's still very, very complicated. We did not sort humans out quite yet, and not going to be anytime soon. So there's still a lot of things that we don't understand. So I'm just going to tell you about two main types of motivation that we talk about. And then emotion and game flow are there to sustain motivation. So I'm going to talk briefly about emotion, but then I'm going to talk a little bit more about game flow and more specifically about learning curve, because onboarding is really important to be able to engage people. Okay, so I know it's going fast, and I'm sorry. There's so many things I need to talk about. Okay, so motivation, like I said, we don't necessarily understand why humans do the things they do, but there's a pretty good it's not a consensus that there's at least two main types of motivation, and these are motivation types that we can more directly apply to game development. There are more types of motivation. I'm not going to get into the weeds of it, but for example, we have extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. For example, if you were forced to watch this presentation, otherwise your boss would have been unhappy with you, that's extrinsic motivation. You're not watching this for the pleasure of watching it to avoid a punishment. And by punishment I mean something that's not pleasurable, like being yelled at or someone not being happy with you is a punishment, a social punishment. Or it can be intrinsic motivation. You are interested into understanding better how to engage players with your games, and you're interested in UX, so then you intrinsically want to watch this presentation. So we use that a lot in games. For extrinsic motivation, we're pretty good at managing this in games. It's just basically make sure that players have clear goals and they do understand what sort of rewards they're going to get as they accomplish these goals. So, for example, do a quest. You can start a quest, and it's going to be very important for players. Sometimes players don't necessarily want to harvest stuff or go grind, 15 pelts of whatever, but they are still going to do it because they care about the reward that they're going to get for that, because with that reward they can craft or build something that they care about. So for all strategy games, any game actually, there's always some rewards there. There's always some steps that you need to get to, so that you can start to plan for action for what's going to be the next stage that you're going to do. So even like highly strategy games, they all have rewards. They all have like steps in the process, and that's really what makes a lot of games interesting, to think about what you're going to get, and with that what you're going to be able to do and how you can accomplish your goal, etc., etc. But for this to be able to work, the goals need to be clear for players. They need to understand what are the things they can do and what are the rewards they will get, and these rewards need to be meaningful. So for example, if you have a reward and you don't really know what to do with this reward, it's not going to be meaningful. So by meaningful, I mean that when the player is receiving the reward, they already know what to do with it. And so sometimes we make that mistake in games to just like give a lot of rewards, but including rewards that players don't yet have a need for it. And that doesn't make that reward as meaningful as if you get a reward, like think of Zelda, and you've seen like polls everywhere at some point in the game. You're like, what is this? And then you see like a pole next to a chest, and you can't get there because it's like an island, and you're like, wow, what do I do with this? And then not too long after that, you get the grappling hook, and then you're like, oh, with the grappling hook I can use it to go with the poles, and then I remember there was a chest. So this is really like when you have the grappling hook, it's a reward that you got for accomplishing something, but it's already meaningful to you. You already know what you're going to do with this reward. So same thing with resources. If you earn resources, but you don't know yet, why is this resource cool? It's not as meaningful as you already know. Oh yeah, copper ore. I definitely need that to craft a thing that I saw that looks super cool. So this is what I mean by meaningful. So the goals in the game need to be clear, and there needs to be like clear rewards associated with it. And by goals, I mean short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. In a lot of games, there's a strong focus on the short-term: win the next match, do the next quest, which is fine. I mean, you do need short-term goals. There's also oftentimes a focus on the long-term goal, like the aspirational goal: catch them all, save the world, be the best, whatever. And what is sometimes missing So it's not necessarily missing on the design, but it's not necessarily expressed well enough for the players are the medium-term goals. Because that's so important, short-term goals, it's okay, but then, why do I need to get more Pokemons? Why do I need to win that next match or gain that next reward? Is that I don't have like a medium-term goal to drive me. And so that's the reason why it's really important to also make sure medium-term goals are expressed. I don't know, unlock a new class of hero, or build a new building that's going to be really cool for the game, or earn a specific weapon, or get the mount, like in World of Warcraft. These are medium-term goals, and they're really engaging for the short-term goals, because the short-term goals are short-term, and it's not enough at some point to be engaging, to keep going. So that's always very important to really look at the medium-term goals in your games. Are they clearly expressed in your game? Because oftentimes this is where it's lacking. This is for extrinsic motivation. But now let's talk about intrinsic motivation, like the things that we do really just for the pleasure of doing them. And just a disclaimer, the dichotomy between extrinsic and intrinsic can sometimes be a bit artificial, especially when we talk about video games. Like, playing a video game is by definition an intrinsic activity, unless you're a professional esports player, for example. So you might need to play to keep in shape, but for most people, you play just because we want to play. So sometimes this dichotomy is a little bit artificial. But for intrinsic motivation, what we care about are competence, autonomy, and relatedness. There's that theory called self-determination theory that is very reliable. So I've been talking about this theory for a few decades now, I believe. And so it's pretty reliable. It's this idea that we as humans, we are more intrinsically motivated to accomplish something or to do an activity when this activity satisfies our needs for competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Competence is basically having that sense of progression. You start an activity, you start playing a music instrument, or new sport, or you're trying to lose weight, whatever it is that you want to do. If as you put effort into that, you see yourself progressing. You're accomplishing your short-term goal and you're getting towards your medium-term goal. Like you're trying to, I don't know, play a specific song on the guitar, and then as you practice every day, you see that you're getting better at it. Or at work, you have a new job, and as you time passes, you can see that you're getting better at it. Maybe your boss is saying good job, or you got a bonus at work. So even if the bonus is an extrinsic reward because it's outside of the activity, it's also great feedback on your competence. It means that because you were competent in your job, then you got a reward. So that's the reason why I'm saying, sometimes the dichotomy between the two can be a bit thin. So that sense of progression is really, really important. It can be skill-based. So in games where you have to have the twitch skills, the more you play, the better you're going to be playing it. So that's showing a sense of progression, but it can also be more artificial. Like think about RPGs, where the more you level up, the more you can buy new skills. And with the skills, these skills make you artificially more powerful in the game. Doesn't matter if it's skill-based or not. What matters is that players need to understand how they can progress, and they need to feel that they are progressing. So for example, a player that is died or failed something, but then they can start again, and they can, because they understood why they failed, they can get better next time. That's fine. But a player that dies and don't understand why they died, and they start again, but they still, because they didn't get it, they're not getting better, and they die again. This is when it starts to not feeling that they're progressing, and so you don't feel competent. You don't have that sense of mastery, and this is typically when we quit an activity. So a lot of players might churn because they don't feel competent. They don't feel that they're progressing. So it's very, very important to make sure that your player is going to have that sense of progression, and to think about how to give that sense of progression to them. Autonomy is basically about self-expression, being able to express yourself through skins, through creativity. So a game like Minecraft, it's very creative, you can do whatever you want. That's very high for autonomy. It can be also by offering players meaningful choices. So typically strategy games are also pretty high in autonomy because you can define what you want to do, what do you want to build next, how are you going to manage your city or whatever. So all games where you have like many systems and you have a lot of choices on how to solve a problem is offering great autonomy. And also it can be just be like, hey, what sort of dance moves do you want to have with your character? That's also about self-expression. And last but not least, relatedness. We're a social species, so we would not have survived without cooperating with one another. So any game that offers that relatedness, so either through cooperation or competition, knowing that cooperation is actually more powerful than competition, like even most competitive games are also cooperative games, it's a team against another team. That's really, really important to, and we love to relate with one another. That's the reason why multiplayer games are oftentimes more successful. It's also just hanging out. So you see that more in games like Roblox or Fortnite. You just can hang out and dance with your friends or just watch a movie or whatever. So that's relatedness. So this is the sort of things you have to make sure that you have in your game. So you don't necessarily have to create, if your game is solo, you don't have to try to fake it. But you can think about how it can be interesting for other people to watch on YouTube, for example, on Twitch, because the relatedness can sometimes happen outside of the game itself. So it's important really to think about what makes sense for your game and how you can make sure to increase that sense of competence, autonomy, and relatedness for your players, because that's going to be key to motivate them and so to engage them with your game. Just an example of, that's an old screenshot from Overwatch. And just that screenshot's mainly 2D. You have expression of competence. You can see, you can level up. So you see your progression and how you get better. You can see autonomy. They can choose, so you choose your role, what sort of role you want to play. You can also choose your skin, you look cool. And it's relatedness. It's a team-based game, so we play with others. The interesting stuff that they did back then is that they give feedback on the competence of your team. So that's really, again, says to make you feel more competent, but at the team level. So it's competence interacting with relatedness. Okay, so I'm going to go a bit faster because we still have a lot of stuff to do. So emotion is also very important. If we get good emotions, that's going to sustain our motivation. So for emotion in games, I will refer to you to the book Game Feel by Steve Swink. It's a very good book to talk about this. But basically, it's all about the 3 C's, the cameras, controls, character. That's going to have an impact on how you feel about the game. Of course, if it's a strategy game, a top-down camera is going to be more helping you feel that you have control over what's going on than a first-person camera. But a first-person camera is more appropriate if you want to scare people, if it's an action game or a horror game. The sense of presence is what we say in common terms, immersion. But immersion actually means, are you immersed with your senses? So technically VR is the most immersive platform, but even if it's super immersive, you might or not have a strong sense of presence. Sense of presence is, do you feel that you are part of the game world? Do you feel that the NPCs or the AI is reacting to what you're doing? Is there also physical reality? Like if you're shooting in the environment, is it breaking stuff? So all that sort of things is really increasing the sense of presence, in increasing the game feel. And overall, it's just, do you feel that you're part of this world, and is it interesting to interact with it? Like you build a building, but if you see the little characters coming over and you start building and you have the sound effects of the sound that you expect to hear as someone is building something, that's increasing the sense of presence. And novelty, this impacts engagement a lot. At some point, if we're used to something, we lower our awareness, we pay less attention because everything is already known. So at some point, and once the players already have a good grip on the game and they know the game very well, this is when it's going to be important to bring some novelties. So it can be, hey, cracks in the wall, what's up with that? Or it can be like, oh, that's a mimic. It looks like a chest, but actually it's not. Haha. Or it could be like a specific level that is changing. For example, in Uncharted 3, you are in a ship. The ship is sinking, so it's rotating 19 degrees, and so are your controls. And so it's bringing like some sense of novelty. For live games, it's very, very, very important. That's why we always have to work to make sure there's new skins, new maps, new heroes, new whatever, because otherwise it gets boring and nothing is new, and so it's not super engaging. All right, last, I want to talk about game flow. So game flow is coming from the term of flow, coming from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who sadly died a few weeks ago. So he was a psychologist trying to figure out, what makes people happier in life, and he found out that being in a state of flow is oftentimes what makes people happier. So you have that a lot with artists, like when you're playing music or painting, whatever it is, you're like in this state where you're super focused. So it's a state of modified consciousness. But it also can happen at work if you're like crunching numbers or you're super into what you're trying to do, and then it feels like nothing else exists. So you're hyper focused, hyper concentrated. It's like you're super filtering out everything else, including like stuff from your body. You might not feel that you're hungry, or you might forget like to go to the restroom. That sort of thing. Game flow, so it's important. It's because it makes us happier. So it's important to experience that state of flow in life. And it turns out that video games can also provide us that state of flow. And so for games, a lot of emphasis is all around the difficulty curve, because to get in the state of flow, you need to be in an activity that is not too easy. If it's too easy, you don't really need to concentrate. Just do it mindlessly. But it cannot be too hard either, because if it's too hard, you get super anxious or stressed out, or you can throw the controller across the room. So you have to be in that sweet spot where the challenge for you is not too easy, not too hard. The problem with difficulty is that a dislike experience is not part of the design. It's relative to the player. So it's difficult to know what sort of difficulty is going to work out. But it's also about pacing. If the game is at the same difficulty level, but it's for a long time, then at some point it's going to get really challenging for players. So we do need moments where you have like waves of enemies, and moments where you can like sit down and think about what you need to do next, and then to, I don't know, craft new weapons or ammunition and stuff like that. So it's important in games to have like sort of moments where you have like a high intense, like fast pace, and moments where it's more relaxed. And learning curve. So like I said, it's you cannot get into the flow if you don't remember what button you need to press to do something. So you cannot really get into the flow if you don't master, well, at least you don't have a good understanding of the game. So that's why onboarding is going to be really, really important, how to onboard players. So there are 3 learning principles that we can use. This is from psychology to help people learn about your game. The first one is behavioral psychology principles. It's conditioning. So that's why I mentioned usability earlier, and I mentioned the signs and feedback. A lot of players are just going to learn about your game just through experimenting stuff. So if your signs and feedback are not clear, they're not going to be able to get what's going on in the game and what's efficient and not efficient. We learn a lot through conditioning. Like, for example, you react to a ton of beeps. You have the beep from your microwave. You have the beep from your computer telling you that it's going to have the next environments. We have learned what they mean and what we should be doing when we hear them or see them. So it's the same thing with games. If it's not consistent and if it's not clear, players are not going to be able to understand the game just through experimenting it. So that's why, you need to focus on your tutorials, definitely, but you have to really polish all the signs and feedback across the game at all times, because if this is not clear from the beginning, it means that players are going to have to learn it, and they potentially can forget about it. Cognitive psychology principles is just basically keeping in mind that perception is subjective, attention resources are scarce, and memory is fallible. So it's building the game, having these limitations of the brain in mind so that we can adjust just to the human brain. So it's basically what we do in UX. And constructivist psychology principles as the idea that we typically we learn typically better by doing. By active learning. And so to do that, we have to have like context and meaning. So context simply means that as you do the activity, you can, as you are taught about something, context, because you have to read first and then do. If in a game, the game is paused and then you have big text, that's not contextual because you cannot do the thing as you are taught. So we do need to make sure that it's in context if we want to teach properly. So of course, if it's something easy or just a reminder, you don't necessarily have to give context all the time. But for something that's important, like building in Fortnite, we were trying to really make sure it was contextual. So how we can make sure that they can do the thing as they're taught, and we also want to make sure that it's going to be meaningful. So here's an example. We were trying to build a situation in Fortnite where it would be they could learn by doing to build, and it would be meaningful. They would care about it. So they had to protect that tractor that was in a barn, and so they have to build just walls to close the barn. But as you can see, the panels on the side were preventing them to close it. And that's already too much information. A lot of players did not think that they needed just to destroy the side panels. A lot of them built around the barn. So that's just showing you like how much is too much. And they start to build around the barn, the first wall, and then second wall, they don't have enough wood. So here's an example where it's contextual. They can do the things as they're taught. But the problem is it's not super meaningful. It's misleading. They have to protect a tractor. They're never going to have to do that again in the game. There's too much information. Like they're under pressure because there's a countdown. So that's already too much information to try to sort out. And so a lot of them just because they panic, so they just try to build around, but they don't know how many pieces of wood they need to build walls. It's the first time they do it, and so they're really set for failure. So that's an example where we try to work on how to teach that sort of things in Fortnite. That was for Save the World. So this is contextual, but it's not super meaningful. And this meaningful part is actually quite important because if you understand what you do, if you care about what you're doing, you're going to really pay more attention to it, and that's going to sustain your motivation to do it. So this is how, at some point, we just iterated on it, and the level designer had a great idea. It's like, hey, how about we just spawn the player in a pit? They're in a pit. There's a bunch of resources there so they can, experiment. And when they're ready to get out, they need to learn how to build stairs to get out. So that's oh yeah, why didn't we think about that earlier? You'd have to create a very complicated narrative around it. You can just do it. And that's actually as great a meaning because you're in the pit, you need to get out, you want to get out to explore Fortnite. And so this is really making building more meaningful. So for onboarding, you have to understand, you have to place, especially for things that are going to be difficult for your game, you're not going to be able to do that for every single mechanic or system. You're going to have to plan and to prioritize. But for things that are important for your game and you think is going to be a bit difficult to learn, you do want to place a player in a situation in which they care about learning things because it's meaningful for them. So think about why. Why should player cares right now about learning this thing that you want to teach them? I'm sorry, I know it's a lot of information, but as you do this, you try to think about all your different systems, all your different mechanics. Of course, you're not going to do the list of everything, but at least the most important ones. And you try to think, okay, is it going to be difficult for them to learn or not? And why are they going to care? And then you try to order things and see, maybe there are things, if they don't learn about it at the beginning, it doesn't matter. They can learn about it later. And that's going to allow you to not teach too much stuff at the same time, which is typically what I'm doing right now with this presentation. It's not good. So make a plan. Make a plan early. Like, think about what is it they need to learn right away in the game. Otherwise, they're not, going to be able to have fun. And what are the things they can learn later on? Because if they don't understand how to play the game and they don't understand how to get better at the game, again, they don't need to know everything at the beginning. But at least if they know how to get better, then that's more engaging. And onboarding matters much more than sometimes we think, especially when we make games for hardcore gamers and we expect that they're just going to get stuff. So here's an example from Paragon, the other game in development at the same time as Fortnite. It was a MOBA. So in MOBAs, you have to destroy the tower of the enemy, and there are very specific rules about when you get inside the area of the tower, how do you get the aggro? So how you get targeted by the tower. If you get inside this area before your minions, you're going to get the aggro from the tower. You're going to die right away. So you need to wait for your minions to get in. But even if there are minions there, if you are inside the area and you start to target an enemy hero, then the tower is gonna you're gonna get the aggro from the tower again. So this is really important to understand the tower aggro rules to be competent in a MOBA. And when we were playtesting the game month before launch, we were actually seeing that sort of behavior where players were tower diving. That was like the first 46 seconds in the game. And so you have two teammates getting in and during that tower dive. And they both die. And so they're going to take a little while for them to respawn because it's not a shooter. Time during which, the opposite team can kill minions and level up. And so these players, when they come back in, they're going to lose fairly fast. And so they can feel that the game is unbalanced. And so this issue that we saw very early on was confirmed with telemetry data weeks after launch. Like the top, like for us, we had like top 5 UX issues that we need to fix in order to make sure that players are going to feel competent. And the top 5 analytics results from their factorial analysis matched our top 5 from a month before. And their top 1 was people are more likely to churn. The people who are more likely to churn, to quit playing that game, are people who died to tower. And we're like, we know why. And so this is when, if you figure that stuff out too late, this is when you can try to put together a tutorial like in very, very quickly. And that's not going to be efficient because you need time to build tutorials. You really have to think about how to make them part of the level design of the game, part of the experience itself, instead of thinking about tutorials as being separate. Learning about the game is part of the experience, and you should treat it as such, and you should really plan for it very early on, and not just, we're launching in 2 months. What about the tutorial? This is not going to work well. All right, so this is basically what I wanted to show you. So of course, a lot of stuff in usability is going to have an impact on motivation. And this is also how you prioritize. If you see that you have a UX issue that is impacting directly people's sense of competence, this is the red flag for you. This means that you have to fix this before launch. There are many things we can fix later on, but anything that's going to impact players' feeling of competence, autonomy, and relatedness, mostly competence, if they don't understand how to get better at the game, you have to fix that, really, because otherwise players are not going to be engaged with your game if they can't understand how to master your game. So you can use this just as guidelines, a checklist. There's no formula, there's no one recipe to make a fun game, but these are elements that can help you figure it out. Of course, you're going to have to test your game and think, how to embed your testing in the production pipeline to make it work. And so UX is a mindset. I hope that I demonstrated a bit of that. UX is not a step in the process. It's not like, oh, hey, we need to UX the game at that point. It is the process. It's a way to think about the development of the game. It's a process that is human-centered. It's grounded in science. It's not about opinions. It's about, we're going to verify your hypotheses. It's collaborative and it's benevolent. We really care about offering the best experience possible to people, and we care about people's best interest. And this is why UX approach is incompatible with the use of dark patterns or shady practices. And that's the reason why ethics, inclusion, accessibility is all part of the package. We want to offer the best experience possible to people. All right, I see that I put too many slides in there. So I just wanted to really touch really quickly about dark patterns. This is really anti-UX. This is when we intentionally try to deceive players for the benefit of the company or to make more money. And so stuff like when we don't see and we just press on the big button to just get started, and you don't really realize that you get started to sign up for Amazon Prime if you just want to check out. You had to click on the small thing. This is exploiting the limitations of the attention resources of humans to just do something that is a great benefit for the company and probably not what people want. So we never want to do that to players. So exploiting human biases around, creating false scarcity, or just make them fear of missing out. The sales end tonight and you're going to miss out, or there's the great event. If you're not part of it, you're going to miss out on a great reward that you're never going to have again. Or, hey, if you're not participating, you're going to lose all the stuff that you did so far. You accumulated rewards, and if you're not logging in tomorrow, you're going to lose all these rewards. You're going to have to start again from the bottom of the ladder. All these things are exploiting human biases, and it's not necessarily benefiting the player. It's more benefiting the company. And that's the sort of things we have to think about in our games. Is this serving the gameplay, really? Like, is the pressure what we put on player really is meaningful for the gameplay? If we don't have that sort of pressure, then the gameplay is meaningless. Or is this just to make people come back and or punish them because they're disengaging? So that's the sort of things that we want to think of. And sometimes it's good UX. Like I said, there's no clear line. Like here, you can say, well, they make you think about deleting your World of Warcraft character because it's not good for Blizzard. But it's actually a win-win situation here. Sure, it's not good for Blizzard if you delete your character, but it's not good for the player if they delete the character by mistake. So here is just a confirmation screen to make sure that this is really something that the players wanted to do. So if you see that there's a win-win situation, then we can say it's a good UX. If you see that there's a lot of pressure that is not necessary, like if the character was crying as you were deleting it, then definitely that would start to become a more shady practice, because we put guilt tripping on player to make them think twice. So that's the sort of thing that we really definitely have to start talking about more. It's a lot of stuff that's around the attention economy that we talked today. It's basically like putting pressure on people to come back. That's something we have to start talking about. But I talked too much, so I apologize for that. Just remember that your brain is very good at making sense of the world with very little information. This is how we survived our predators. We have to make really fast decisions. But of course, our environment is much more complex today, and we're going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. Your players are going to make mistakes. They're going to see something. They're going to be sure that they understand what it means. But actually, this was not your intention. So just never take anything for granted. Hypotheses and verify your hypotheses, and think about how to empower your players so that they can feel competent in playing the game. That's really key to engaging them with your game. So thank you so much for your attention. The Gamer's Brain is my professional book where all these theories that I talked about is in detail. The Psychology of Video Games is a very short book. This is not for game developers. This is more to explain how we use psychology in games and what is the impact of these games on people. So, oh my God, that was I tried to make it shorter so I could answer questions, but I'm happy to answer your questions now. Happy to stay longer if I'm allowed, but otherwise, feel free to poke me on Twitter if I don't have the time to answer your questions. All right, so let's see. Are there questions? So I see some questions here. Speaking of neuroplasticity, is it possible to impose improvements on UX on specific users with a relatively short span of time? A good example of longer term is the adoption of the touchscreen interface. Um, yeah, so all things around conditioning is like, for example, now we are very used to swipe left and right and on mobile. So there's that idea of familiarity with something, and you do want to capitalize on that because if you try to teach like a new interaction or a new icon that is not known, then you will have to think about to make sure you can repeat that to players so that it's really starting to get into it. But uh, the problem is that you are competing with other games. So let's say if you're in country, if you drive on the left and you get to a country that drives on the right, that's going to take you time to get used to it. And once you come back to your country and you have to drive on the other side, it's also taking you some time to get back to that idea. Same thing for games. If players are used to a certain way of interacting in one game and your game is different, sure, at some point they'll be able to learn it if you make sure that you prepare them and you repeat the stuff so they can really integrate it. But then they're gonna play another game that maybe does not use the same thing, and when they come back to yours, they're gonna have to relearn. So I'm not sure if this is what you meant, but you have to be careful with that. And that's the reason why we do want to capitalize on what is familiar to players. So that's why you have to start with who are your players? What are they familiar with? So you can capitalize on that. I hope that answered the question. Yeah, so the update on the ethical games initiative, I see that the question is, so I'm currently working with scholars because I want this to be evidence-based. So it's going to take a little while. So I'm gonna try to gather all the resources that we have for all the different sections so that we can define more precisely some guidelines. So that's, of course, with the pandemic, that was not made easy. But that's the first step for me. So hopefully, I hope to be able to give some updates sometime early next year. Form follows function. Do you feel this is something designers shouldn't take for granted? For example, Mario Kart clones may have the equivalent of green shell item, essentially a one-hit new players. Yeah, we should never take anything for granted. But you have to also, again, who is your players? Is your game like fairly broad, and so it's going to attract new players that not necessarily played all your games in their series? Or is your game like super hardcore, super niche, and you're doing like the DLC for that game? Even if you do the DLC for a game that's super niche that your players have played, maybe they haven't played your game for a few months and then they're coming back. Do not expect that you remember how things work. So that's why anytime you can use a metaphor that is true with real life, do it. Like the tortoise going slow, or an axe to chop off wood. That was something that we had a problem with Fortnite because initially we had different elements like axes to chop off trees and pickaxe for rocks. But then at some point, the design decided, no, it's too complicated. Let's just have one tool to harvest everything, and it's going to be the pickaxe. But then we already had all the art assets, so we had axes there. Of course, we're not going to throw that away, so we're going to reuse it. But axes in real life are used to chop off trees. And so when the player is going to see an axe, they're going to expect to be able to harvest faster wood with this. And so now we create a false affordance that is just from a legacy issue from the design. And so we can have that sort of legacy issues across genre, across franchises. and it's always very dangerous to use that. And there's also some metaphors or archetypes that are really strong for one generation or one culture. Like I often take the example of the floppy disk for the saving icon. It's not going to mean the same thing for younger generations who never had to use a floppy disk in their life. So they're going to have to learn about this icon. Whereas someone older like me, like for me, it's immediately I understand what that means. So that's also very true for different cultures. There's stuff that we use in a culture that's super clear. It's not going to be clear for another culture. So yeah, never take anything for granted. Typically, test. You can try and you can test with your players and see if it's understandable or not. But if it's not something like a metaphor from real life that works across all cultures, it's a good chance that you're gonna have to make sure it works. Since you're a PhD comes to science, do you think doing a kind of psychology degree is a good way to be a UX designer? Um, Not necessarily. So I have on my website, celiahoden.com, I did write a piece about how to get into the game industry as UX person. So I do describe a lot of stuff in there. But there are two, let's say there are two main paths. You have UX design and you have UX research. For research, I do think it's really, really important to have a background in research. So more specifically, experimental psychology, cognitive psychology, human factor psychology, because you do need to understand how to conduct a research. Because upon the human brain, human brain is very biased, and we can bias the result of a research if we don't know how to do it properly. So that's why we use the scientific method. So we're not as rigorous as in academic research, of course, because we're here to just make a gain. But still, we need to make sure we control biases so that we don't find a result that actually is not there. So for UX research, I would recommend to have a degree in psychology, so kind of psychology, kind of science, but more specifically to know how to conduct research. For UX design, what you want is to learn HCI, human computer interaction. So that's applied cognitive science. And HCI or human factors engineering or psychology is all about applying this to design industrial design, to web design, game design. So that's going to be important to have some notions there, but you do not need a degree in psychology. There are some classes that are really designed for that. So it's anything called human factors psychology, human factors engineering, computer science. Sometimes you have that, or HCI, so human computer interaction. But these are design courses. So you need to learn how to design. But you're going to learn stuff like Fitts law and Hicks law. So these are laws in HCI that can help you design an environment. But still, what you learn is to have a design thinking process, is to always have the human at the center. So even if we have these laws and we have these guidelines that allow us to start, not too bad. Your design is never going to be good unless you iterate on it. You make a test with your players or your users, and you iterate based on what happens. But you also has to start with what do they care about. So for tools, definitely you need to learn who your users are and what do they need and what are their goals. We start there. So also for games, we need to understand why would they play your game? What are they going to care about your game? And if they need to do something in your game, what are their objectives and what they're trying to accomplish in your game. So if you create a crafting system in your game, this is where you need to start. What do your players care, and why would they want to craft, and how would they do that? And so this is how we do it. So I'm just saying that theory is important, but the core of UX design, like I said, it's human centered. So if we don't have a human at the center of it and we don't test our design, it's not UX. It's just a good guess. So Skinner boxes are not necessarily bad. You in any game you have Skinner boxes. So what is a Skinner box? Is basically um, so extrinsic motivation, and it's a variable reward. Most games have that. So any game where you have a throw of dice or a draw of cards, you have a scanner box, because sometimes you have double six and sometimes you have a crop number. So there's very, very few games that do not have that. Like chess would be an example, or Go are examples when you don't have that. But other games, they all have this, like the bonus you get in Mario Kart, it's a scanner box. The problem is when the scanner box is tied to monetization in loot boxes. So yeah, I know that I need to go now, but I have a piece on ethics and all that on my website as well, so you can take that.
Hi, Celia. I'm so sorry. I
No,
believe we're a little out of time, but thank you so much. What a fantastic
Thank you for having me.
We had such lovely engagement from the audiences, so many amazing Q&A for that session. So really want to thank you for being a part of IGDC. It's been a pleasure to have you here. So thank you. Oh, we can see the audience.
Yay! Thanks for the love. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Bye.
Right. Vijay, why don't you come on up once, folks? So this is the last session of IGDC. Thank you all so much for attending. We hope you enjoyed it. We had a much shorter set of tracks over these last 3 days, but we've tried our best to make sure that design at least brought you a lot of value. Folks, the handout has a survey form. Please fill it up. It helps us get great speakers like Celia to come and talk to you every year. Let us know what you want, and we will do our best to make it happen next year. But thank you so much. You've been a fantastic audience. Vijay, you want to say the nice things?
No, thanks, guys. I'm so sorry we couldn't take all the questions for you this time. But yeah, Celia is on Twitter in case you ever want to hit her up. Or if you want to see her next year, maybe possibly at a physical event, physical conference, fill out that survey form. Just on the right side, select handouts, click on that link, and it shouldn't take more than a minute.
It's like one question.
Cool.
Okay,
guys, thank you so much. Shagan and Karishma, thanks for helping out as well.
Thanks, you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Vijay. Thanks, Karishma. And folks, we'll see you next year around, this time again. All right. See you around. Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks
Good night.
Bye-bye.